Welcome back. We're here with Dr. Lisa Strohman, a clinical psychologist, author of the book Unplug, founder and director of Digital Citizen Academy, that you can learn more about at dcakids.org. And I'm just fascinated by your work and, how a young psychologist gets connected to the FBI. And you're studying these people who do really evil things and trying to understand them, but really the trauma that they can unleash on the world, especially to the most vulnerable of our population. What are the dangers, Lisa? If you step back over your career over the last 20 years, what are the things that keep you up at night, that worry you about what's happening in our society?
Well, there's a lot. I don't sleep much because of the work that I do. But I will say that probably the biggest issue I see is that I think that we don't recognize as the adults in the room that when our children are attached to devices, that on a given day, that is a gateway into this other world. And so on a given day, you'll have 4.3 million people online that are accessing the same content, the same places. They're traversing those fields that your children are playing in. And you have, even just in the United States, we have about 1.2 million predators online every day that are seeking out pretty girls, vulnerable children, boys that might be angst, like all of these things that we're looking at. And so I think I used to talk about stranger changer when I very, very first started. And now I talk about tricky people. It's the tricky people that know the technology better than we do, that can find, say, on Snapchat, they can go on to the Snap Map, and like we had a stalking case here where a stranger showed up outside of a 12-year-old's bedroom window, and they called the police, they caught the peeper, they brought him in, they pulled all of his devices, and then the police, literally, which is the team that I work with, had to go and knock on 16 other parents' doors and say, just want you to know that this guy has images of your child that you have no idea that he was taking through their windows. And I think that terrifies me.
I would have invited him in.
Well, Tana,
he was found outside that window. Good for him anyways.
Yeah. So that's the part that I think that keeps me up at night, is understanding that look, I'm not going to take my 12-year-old and drop her off at the gates of a stadium with 80,000 fans and strangers and say, I'll be back in 4 hours. Why, as parents, do we think it's okay to send them online with over 4 million people at a given time and think that something bad isn't going to happen? And to me, the only way to approach that is empower the children to understand the rules and understand the playgrounds that they're going into and the people that are there. And it's a balance between developmentally understanding. Is it a first grader that I'm going to talk about being helpful, inspiring, and kind online? Or is it going to be, a middle schooler where I'm going to say, look, there's bad people in the world and you need to think about whether or not at 12 you're that interesting, because you're not going to have another 12-year-old talk to you for 3 hours because you're not that interesting. And so, how do you do that with kindness and with fun? Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Our daughter, our 16-year-old, thinks that we have effectively instilled, as you like to say, an anxiety disorder in her because she's terrified of everything.
I know, being a child of a psychologist that deals with
and a mother who's experienced enough stuff in the world, I'm brutally honest just about what can happen.
So what can parents do? What should parents do to protect their kids?
There's a lot that they can do. I think the number one thing that I talk to parents about is be present and don't love them so much that you miss it. I think that we all love our kids so much and we want to trust that they're good and that they're smart and that they're making the best decisions that they can, obviously with developing brains, but don't miss those signs, those key signs. And the tricky part is, during puberty, during those years that I always tell parents, I'm like, buckle up. It's going to be messy. It's going to be a bumpy ride. And they're going to they probably aren't going to like you for a little while, but stay present, pay attention to what they're doing. So that's the first thing that I tell them is the most important. And then the second one is do something online where you're monitoring and paying attention to what they are. There's tons of good programs out there. There's Thing, which is something that we talked about a little bit. There's Circle with Disney that you can do in the home. There's we partnered with Family Time on our program. So it's this app, there's apps out there and there's programs and units that you can have in your home that you can actually pay attention. And what I say is like, treat your kids like Vegas, their technology use, and say to them, like, I'm going to check in just the way that your friends are checking in. And just because I think that you don't always know all the signs that maybe the adults do.
So I have a couple questions. You touched on, I want to touch on two things. You said, look for the signs. So I'd love for you to just recap that for our listeners. And these apps, obviously, I'm assuming that you have this conversation with your kids. Your kids know that you're on these apps.
Yes.
Well, and I just want to speak to this point. My kids might not like it. And what I've learned is when you supervise children, they don't like it. But they actually hate it more if you don't supervise them, because that means you don't care. So it's so critical to be their frontal lobes until theirs develop. And your job is not to be their friend.
It's to be their parent.
Friendship comes great, but it's to supervise them and to keep them safe and developing in a safe way. It's like, my child said, well, I really want to play football. The answer is no. And it's like, but I really want to. And it's like, well, if you really wanted to do cocaine, the answer is still no, because I know it's a brain damaging sport. But a digital addiction is damaging as well. And it can damage this very important part of your brain called the nucleus accumbens that helps you feel joy, that helps you feel pleasure, and also damage your frontal lobes. So you're going to be more vulnerable to addiction of cocaine and heroin and alcohol and cigarettes if you don't take care of often a child's first addiction, which is a digital addiction.
Yeah, it's one thing that you said that's really interesting. So we have a pretty good teenager. She was really hellion as a kid, but she's 16. So she's starting to push on things. And so I, as you said, buckled up for one thing recently. And I was like, oh, here we go. I just knew it was going to be, just a nightmare. And that was one of those moments where you're not a friend. And it was like, this is how it's going to be. You're not coming home at 1:00. This is going to be your curfew. This is how it's going to go. And I was just ready. And she did the whole, I think a lot of kids do this, but why? I don't understand. And when I said, she's like, I'm not doing anything bad. And I said, it's okay if you don't understand. You don't need to understand. My job is to keep you safe because I love you. And shockingly, she backed down. So I think a lot of parents are ready for their kids to just flip out, and some kids will. But she actually came and she goes, okay, I do understand. I understand. I love you. I don't want to worry you. And I think that if you keep it up, for a lot of kids, they actually do understand. They just want to see how far they can go. But they do like having some boundaries around them. They feel safer. And they don't want to be they don't want to look like the nerd or the bad guy with their friends. It's better if the parent is the bad guy. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being the bad guy.
You are.
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah.
Well, and it's not necessarily being the bad guy. I think it's an excellent point that you bring up, that the boundaries that they need, they don't know yet. Right. And so it is your job to parent. And I think, I don't know how many different talk shows I've been on, and I get an applaud from the audience from just making that statement. And I think, no, that's it's not applaudable. Like, everybody should be doing that. We should just be parents, and we should understand that it's not my job to make you happy.
Nope.
And make your job, it's to be a kid and to understand that I'm in control. Yes.
I will applaud that. Yes.
Thank you.
Because people think it's their job to make their kids happy.
Right. And it really isn't. And the digital space with these technology and these devices is, like my daughter's in 7th grade now, and she doesn't have any devices.
Oh,
and she said to me, and I said to her, I said, here's the parameters. Of course, she's grown up with me, so I have a huge jar of money for therapy because I know she'll need it.
Exactly. That's what I always say. I'll pay for your therapy.
Right. But my reality is like, I've given her the truth since she was little about, here's the reality, here's the issues, here's the situation. And I've got 2 kids, 15 months apart. My son he pushes the boundaries. Like he definitely will come in. He's like, I want to play this game because my friends are all on this game. And so one of the games he's wanted to play was roadblocks. And my daughter's like, you realize that that's going to put your brain into mush. like he's ridiculous or even wanting it. And I said, well, let's have a conversation. Let's sit down. Let me talk to you about a few of the cases. And he literally covers his ears and he's like, please don't tell me that there's bad people on these on this. And I was like, well, as a matter of fact, let's talk about, so, but it's giving them a part of like some of the why in some of the line, right? All of the line, some of the why. Right. And I think that what's changed with me is like my daughter walks around again, terrified, a little bit more too terrified, but she'll say these devices like basically track us everywhere we're going. You're dropping me off at a school that you trust. I know that I can go and use the phone in the office at any time. I think it's ridiculous that I need to have that. So I think that that's important for parents to recognize. It's like, if you're paying for private school or you're doing tutoring, you're doing all of these things, you know where your kids are. Like, why do you need to have personal attachment to them at 8, 9, 10? Like, to me, it's a bit silly. I get when they're 16, they're starting to travel the world and they're starting to drive. And, when they get older, there's a lot of other things that they need to understand. How do I use this as a tool? And that's one of the biggest signs I will tell you were asking me about is if your child is being used by technology and your child is not using technology, that is a huge sign.
Wow.
That's I really like that. Powerful. That's really important.
All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about more practical tips. And we should also talk a little bit about adult digital addictions because they're everywhere. Stay with us.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen Clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.